Hello, everyone. My guest today is Alex Quilici. He is the CEO of YouMail, a smart telephony company with a popular app to block robocalls. Before that, he co-founded and sold Quack to AOL for $200 million. This was essentially Siri over a 1-800 number back before smartphones. And then he helped lead AOL voice services to million paying customers with the first scalable consumer VoIP answering and voicemail to email service platform. Alex, you ready to take us to the top?
Yep, let's go.
All right, man. Robocalls. Well, especially as the political kind of system is heating up here. We're all getting these robocalls we don't want. How are you solving the problem?
So we basically play an out of service message when the bad guys call your cell phone. So when they hear the do, this number's out of service, they tend to stop calling you. So that's how we go robocalls.
Interesting. So how do you know that the inbound number is coming from a robocaller?
So there's a couple of ways. So one of the best things we do is something called voicemail fingerprinting. So the bad guys often leave audio messages when they call people. We have a Shazam for voicemail. So we can take that audio message, look it up in the database and go, hey, that was tagged as a bad behaving IRS scam or a Social Security scam. We now know this number is misbehaving and we can start blocking it. So one call to the YouMail base from a number and it's blocked for all the YouMail users.
So you rely on some kind of endpoint from someone, whether it's you manually doing it with Mechanical Turk or you capturing, your users' data. You have to identify that number first from somebody. What is that data source you're using? Are you sourcing it from your user base or is it some other method?
So we replace your mobile voicemail in order to play that greeting to the robocallers. And so because we're a voicemail service, we have all the voicemails. And so we can algorithmically look at the database of bad voicemails in the same way that, say, Gmail would look up bad emails to know, hey, this is a scam email.
So if I connect with you today, you'd look at my historical, you'd look at all the voicemails in my call thing and you'd say, oh my gosh, this is definitely a robocall. We're going to take this number, block it for Nathan and block it for all of our other users.
As we go forward, that's right. So not only do we have the voicemail fingerprint, but users will tell us when we get it wrong. They can report something as spam or a scam, and then we know, hey, we missed this one. It can get added to the database. There's also times where numbers just behave badly. Like it looks like a Verizon wireless number is calling millions of people and not leaving a message. We know that number is misbehaving too. So there's a number of things we do, but it's mostly anchored by what we call Shazam for voicemail.
That's interesting. Okay, how are you pricing this thing? What do people pay on average per month for it?
So it's free. And the reason it's free is we couldn't stomach charging people to block calls they don't want. Those calls shouldn't be there in the first place. But we do have a freemium model. So we do have paid stuff that people move to. And that's how we support and grow the business.
Okay. So just looking at your paid cohort, give me a sense. Are we talking $10 a month, $100 a month? What are people paying?
Think of it, it's $120 a year, or sorry, $100 a year or $12 a month. That's our model.
Okay.
So, and the target for the paid audience are the people who are lawyers, contractors, plumbers, the people who rely on their phone for their business. They get us originally to stop blocking or to stop the robocalls, block all the robocalls. But then they realize we have a lot of features that help deal with a high volume of phone calls. And so that's a no-brainer at $12 a month.
Interesting. All right, put all this on a timeline for me. When did you launch the company? What year?
So it's really interesting. I didn't launch the company. The company was launched in 2007 to try to sell better voicemail to carriers. And I came in as an investor, wound up on the board, and somehow wound up running it and raising VC money. And the rest is history. We've been at it for a while.
How much did you guys raise?
So we've raised about 15 million over time. It was about 7 million from VCs. We raised 5 million in a crowdsourced round because we had to recap the company, and the rest is me.
Why did you come in? There was obviously something happening where growth wasn't what you guys wanted it to be, and you said, I'm going to come off the board and operate this thing.
Well, I came in pretty early because I'd been at AOL and I thought there was a need for a scalable platform for cloud-based voicemail for the carriers. I thought if you could get that, you could start doing a lot of interesting stuff. And the company had that. They had the basic pieces to do that. So I thought, let's go try to sell it to carriers. It just took us 3 years to realize that carriers move really slowly and our runway wasn't that long. Mm-hmm. And at that time, we discovered we'd put out a BlackBerry app. That's how long ago it was.
You're aging yourself.
I'm dating myself. The BlackBerry app had 1 million downloads. And we're like, we just did that as a prototype to show carriers what we could do. Maybe there's an actual business. So we switched gears and then focused on consumer. And that's what got me really excited, was going direct to consumer.
Okay, but Alex, I want you to there has to be a tough story in here. And this happens all the time where investors kind of replace a CEO for a variety of reasons, sometimes good, sometimes bad. Where is the original founder? What happened to the original CEO?
The original CEO stayed with the company in different roles after I took over because he had some talent, and then left a few years later because the company was just going in a different direction than they'd planned. The original marketing guy wound up in New Zealand with his own startup there. And, we just had to change the whole team. It wasn't about carriers anymore. It was about consumers. It wasn't about, web-based voicemail. It became, we have to build apps. And so everything changes. And basically the CTO and I are the ones that have stayed the whole time with a few developers, and we've built the team up from there.
Interesting. Okay. And then so you come in, you take over the company. Now, what have you scaled to today in terms of total customers using you?
So we're just under 10 million YouMail users who have accounts with us, which is pretty cool. And the thing we're most proud of is there's over 150 million people who've called a YouMail user and interacted with our service in the past 12 months. So basically half of America has called and interacted with YouMail at some point.
I love that. And then when we look at just the paid cohort, how many folks are paying you for the service because they love it so much?
So we haven't said, but it's pretty significant. We're able to convert a decent percentage, just like everybody else out there, like the Dropboxes and everybody else. So we're doing pretty well.
What is Dropbox? I don't know that number off the top of my head. What does Dropbox convert? Kind of free to pay?
I think what most subscription services convert 2% to 5%, somewhere in that ballpark.
Yeah. So, is it fair to say then 2% of your 10 million, that would be low end? You have north of 200,000 people that have decided to pay you?
Over time, it's actually been higher than that, but people churn off and, try different things. So, but it's in that ballpark over time.
How do you, we talk about B2B churn all the time at these low kind of ACVs. I imagine it's even worse in B2C, and it can be frustrating sometimes, right? Because you do pro formas around acquisition and CAC and lifetime value and all that jazz. How do you manage your churn?
So it's really interesting. For us, the big thing is to get people onto an annual plan. If we get someone set up, so they're happy with the service and they move to an annual plan, the churn rate's really low. The hardest ones are sort of the low price. I'm just going to try this little premium offering for a month or two. It's not quite what I wanted. There's a lot of spinning there. But once you move people into the more serious plans, you can actually do pretty well and get churn rates in the 1% to 2% a month category, which is pretty solid.
Okay, so when you look at a blended average though across your total paid user base, you're talking like 30 or 40% annual churn. Is that accurate or?
I'd say it's less than that, but churn is an extremely complicated topic because as you get your company gets older, you get people who've been around for 10 years, which makes it look like your churn rate's extremely low. So the ratio of new people coming in to old people, if you want to study churn, it's probably a PhD dissertation, just trying to enumerate all the things that can affect your churn ratio and make it look better or worse.
Yeah. There are tons of different ways to measure. But generally speaking, if you take the cohort that signed up a year ago, whether it was a monthly plan or an annual plan, and generally look at how much revenue you lost versus how much you expanded them, right? You can kind of back into those churn metrics. And look, the only reason you'd really care about churn is, well, one, if you want to get SaaS multiples, you want to prove that your thing is sticky. But two, it allows you to determine how aggressive to be to get the customer, right? So that's my next question for you, right? Is how aggressive are you being fully weighted CAC wise to get a new $12 a month customer?
Well, so what's really interesting is it used to be zero. So believe it or not, we paid nothing. So we just were growing organically and casting a net that way, with referrals. People would find us in the app stores, et cetera. So we're not paying anything for that. And then a certain percentage would move to paid. The challenge then is your growth isn't that fast, right? Because it's just purely organic. So now we're starting to get more and more aggressive. Every month we spend more and more acquiring customers, and we're willing to pay $50, maybe even $100 for a customer. It depends on the source and the channel and how good the customer will be. And our lifetime's pretty good. We have customers, certain plans, it's $500 lifetime, maybe even more. So then it becomes an interesting thing about just how long are you willing to wait for that return?
Yeah, I was going to say, if you kind of take a weighted average, and you're right, there are cohorts, especially with a 16 plus year history, but on average, if you're churning 30% annually, that gives you a lifetime value of 40 months at $12 is basically $500 LTV, right? And so if you feel good about spending 50 to $100, that's an 8-month payback period. You would do that all day long, especially if you have funding to bridge the cash gap.
That's exactly right. And so the key is to prove that you can keep scaling and that price will always be there, right? Like a lot of companies find, hey, we can buy 5,000 customers at $100 each. That 5,000 first customer is suddenly $500. Mm-hmm. Oops. And so a lot of it is you want to spend very carefully to figure out where each of those kind of step function points are. So you don't suddenly go, ooh, what happened? We spent all this money, but we didn't get anybody else.
Yeah. So I would argue that and I'm going on a limb here because we've known each other for approximately 10 minutes and 18 seconds. I'd imagine your creative genius is actually finding new kind of honeypots, right, to go after. It's actually finding new channels, new oil wells you can kind of jump into, whether that's a new app store you stumbled upon or a new affiliate partnership or things like that. Would you agree with that? And if so, what does your process look like for finding new channels?
Well, so what's really interesting is for us, we focus acquisition on people with a robocall problem, right? So it's all about where do you find those folks? A lot of it is those folks are searching. They're like, stop bad calls, stop telemarketers, stop robocalls. That's a great channel. It's just a question of where are they searching. Other people are, they're on Facebook and they happen to see an ad at the same time they got a robocaller. That ad's going to perform pretty well. So a lot of it is just trying each channel and figuring out the way to talk to people in that channel. When people are searching for a solution to robocall blocking, it's just a search. Really easy to say, hey, we block robocalls. Here's how. Let's do it. Excuse me. If people are on Facebook, it's a little bit more challenging to get the right graphic, the right message. So people are just kind of floating around going, oh, yeah, I had that problem. I had those calls yesterday. Let me try this.
Yeah. I mean, but it's extremely competitive, right? If I type stop robocalls into Google, you got 10.4 million results, right? And most of them are like the FCC, the CTIA, CNN, Fox News doing stories on that stuff. I actually don't see many tools on the front page except maybe robokiller.com, right? So how do you guys play the SEO game?
Well, so what's really interesting is most people are searching for robocalls are not doing it on their desktop, right? Okay. It's because your mobile phone got something. You're like, God, how do I block calls? They do it in the app. They go to the app store and they do it there. They also sometimes when they search, robocalls, they'll see articles or they'll see us have seen us on the news the next day. So they'll actually, or the previous day, so they'll actually search for us. So for us, PR has been a really important part of our strategy, which is we're out there on a lot of different news stations talking about the problem, what people should do, why it's there. And that's been a great channel for us, even though we sort of stumbled into it.
Yeah. What's your team size today? How many folks?
I'm looking around the room, trying to count quickly, about somewhere between 25 and 30.
Okay. Fair enough. And any plans to raise additional capital?
We're always looking for opportunities. I think for us at this point, that's a really interesting possibility is to go raise a big round and start scaling up the marketing.
Yeah. What would you consider big? You're talking like 10, 15, 30 million?
When you get to a company that's been around for a while, 10 really is kind of the magic number. And then it's plus or minus depending on the enthusiasm of investors, right?
Yeah. And why is kind of a raise the right decision versus, sell the company? You've done that before as well, right? If you had a term sheet from both a VC at a valuation you liked and another version of AOL, right, at the same valuation that the term sheet gives you, which one do you take?
Well, what's really interesting is when we sold to AOL, we had a term sheet that was going to give us $15 million at a post of like 45 or 50, right?
Yep.
And we had a plan that said, hey, in about 4 years, we'll be at 30 million in revenue or 25 million in revenue. And AOL came with a much bigger offer. It was like, wow, we'd have to work 4, 5, 6
200
years
million, right?
To get there. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So it's a no-brainer. Let's not take the money. Let's do it. You really have to look at your acquisition offers versus where you're going to grow versus what capital does and do some math and a little bit of, finger in the wind, like where do we think we're going to wind up?
Yeah, interesting. Now, in terms of where you're at today, and I think these numbers are going to be conservative because you, I think, gave me minimums, but at a $12 ARPU, right? And say you're converting on the low end of the 2 to 5% range, you told me that's 200,000 customers paying $12 a month, puts you at like 2.4 million a month right now in revenue. Is that generally accurate?
No, because the 200,000 is people who've ever signed up. It ends up being less when you start applying churn. So we're not that high in revenue. We're doing fine. We're well above kind of the magic number to go raise bigger rounds, but we're not up there.
I won't ask more except this one last question. I mean, have you passed 10 million in run rate right now?
We haven't said. I'd say that's our next target.
I see. Okay.
We're pretty close.
I was going to say, does that feel like a stretch goal for this year or does it feel like achievable?
You never know, right? I'd say everything is always a stretch because you never know what's going to go wrong. But I would be shocked if we don't get there in the relatively near term.
Yeah, I asked that question because I feel like founders have the most leverage once they get their ARR basically to match the total funding they've raised, right? So if you hit a 15 run rate and you've raised 15, you have a lot of leverage to go do whatever you want to do next.
You're exactly right. Or you can show that, hey, we're going to hit this within 6 months with this money or whatever the time period is. You're on the right trajectory. Everybody just draws a straighter line or slopes it. That's when you're in good shape.
Yeah. And now what does growth look like? So if you go back a year, I mean, are you growing still like 10, 20, 50, 100% year over year?
We've been a very steady 25% grower, right? So some years it's better, some years it's a little bit worse, but surprisingly, it's just been along that line, which is one reason to raise capital, which is to move that number up, right? And go from 25 to 50 or a bigger percentage of growth.
Yeah, no, that makes good sense. Very good. All right, let's wrap up here, Alex, with the famous five. Number one, what's your favorite business book?
That's a great question. I'm struggling with that one because I haven't read a lot of business books.
What's your favorite book? Do you read a lot?
Well, I do. But I think actually Free, the book by, I think it was Chris Anderson that talked about the power of doing things for free, was a huge book for me. And it's been a lot of the thoughts there have helped us design the YouMail products.
Number two, is there a CEO you're following or studying?
Yeah, actually, Jack Dorsey of Twitter. I find him to be very interesting, and he's got a really tough road to hoe politically.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, he sure does. Number three, what's your favorite online tool for building your company?
Surprisingly, it's Slack. I really like Slack.
And number four, how many hours of sleep do you get every night?
I have a teenager and 11-year-old, so I'm usually about 6.5 if I'm lucky.
All right. So 2 kiddos and married?
I am married. Yeah, 19 years. So
amazing.
It's been a while.
That's great. Okay. And how old are you?
That I'm not saying publicly.
I'll say 25 years young. All right. Last question. What do you wish your 20-year-old self knew?
I wish my 20-year-old self was more aggressive and more of a. And when I got to 30, I became it. Not at 20.
Yeah. Well, why do you say that, by the way? I mean, you sold a company for $200 million, and now you're jumping back into this, a VC funded thing. I mean, I'd say you took on a lot of risk.
I didn't take it early enough. I wish I'd taken it right out of school. I had the opportunity to go work for a company that became extremely large, where I would have been one of the early employees. And I'm like, no, I think I'm going to go to grad school, make sure I've got a lot, kind of work down that path.
Yeah.
And I wish I'd just left off the bridge.
Guys, YouMail.com, helping stop robocalls. Call it 65, 70, 80,000-ish customers paying $12 a month for, call it 700, 800 grand a month right now in revenue. He's got 10 million in ARR in his sights, growing the company 20% year over year, 15 million into the company to date, 25 folks on the team, 30% churn. Obviously, that's difficult to measure, but about 30%. Lifetime value is anywhere in the 500-ish range. Totally willing to spend up to $100 to get a new customer for an 8, 9, 10 month-ish payback period. Alex, thank you so much for taking us to the top.
Thank you. And you asked some great questions. It was really fun.